When you picture a Valkyrie, you picture a fearless female warrior charging into battle, armored, invincible, leading men into glory. Movies and games have absolutely sold you that image. But here's the problem. The actual Norse texts describe something radically different and far stranger than anything Hollywood dreamed up.
So what's the actual story? What were the Valkyries really supposed to be in Norse mythology? And how did we end up with a modern image that's so profoundly wrong?
By the end of this, you'll understand exactly what the original texts say Valkyries actually were. Not the warrior women you've seen on screen, but something far more complicated. You'll see how medieval Christian scribes and 19th century romantic artists completely rewrote the mythology in their own image, turning divine fate weavers into armored cavalry. You'll grasp the stark difference between Valkyries, supernatural beings, and the rare historical shield maidens who may have actually fought in Norse society. And you'll understand why the fragmentary sources mean we may never know the full, complete truth.
But here's where we actually get our information. Two main Norse sources. First, the Prose Edda, compiled by Snorri Sturluson around 1220 CE. Snorri wrote as a Christian scholar, more than 200 years after the Viking Age ended. Then there's the Poetic Edda, older oral poems, originally transmitted by memory, finally written down in 13th century manuscripts. One of these poems, Grimnismal, lists 9 specific named Valkyries: Brynhildra, Skuld, Gondul, Geravor, Gol, Gerskogul, Skogul, Hildra, and Thrudra. Each one pops up in different saga tales, usually with fragmentary, sometimes contradictory accounts. Take Brynhildra, the most famous. In some texts, she's punished by Odin. In others, she's a hero's wife. The stories just don't match. That's not poetic variation. That's 2 centuries of retelling breaking the original down. So what were they actually supposed to be? In Norse texts, a Valkyrie literally means chooser of the slain. Sounds dramatic, right? But the actual job was mundane, serving mead and ale to fallen warriors in Valhall, not commanding them in battle. That's because Valkyries weren't independent choosers at all. They were agents of word, the Norse concept of fate itself. They didn't pick warriors based on courage or skill. They executed a predetermined cosmic order, decided before the battle even started. And who decided that? The Norns, 3 female weavers named Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld, representing past, present, and future. They were more powerful than any god, even Odin. Valkyries were just their subordinate agents, carrying out choices the Norns had already woven into existence.
So while we're unpacking what Valkyries were supposed to be, there's another layer of confusion. Actual Viking Age women. They had surprising legal rights. They could own property, manage estates, divorce their husbands. But, and this is crucial, archaeological evidence shows that actual women warriors were rare. Shield maidens, the term for historical women who may have fought in Norse society, show up occasionally in sagas, but burials tell a different story. Only 5 to 10% of female Viking burials contain weapons, compared to 40 to 50% of male burials. And when weapons do appear in women's graves, they're often smaller or symbolic compared to male burials, suggesting a fundamentally different relationship to warfare. The point? Shield maidens were an exception, not the rule.
But here's where mythology really breaks down. The sagas containing everything we know about Norse mythology were written in the 13th, 14th centuries by Christian monks, not Norse pagans. They reframed pagan beliefs, interpreting Valkyries as demons or corrupted figures, rather than how the Norse originally understood them. The gatekeeper? Snorri Sturluson, who compiled the Prose Edda over 2 centuries after the Viking Age. Snorri wrote as a Christian scholar, and his interpretations shaped modern understanding, sometimes directly contradicting the Poetic Edda's earlier accounts. You've got parallel stories of the same Valkyrie across different sagas, with major variations.
The Volsunga saga and the Poetic Edda's Sigurd cycle overlap, but conflict significantly. Were these true variations or separate stories conflated? That remains unknown.
What changed everything? The 19th century Romantic movement. Scholars and artists, particularly Richard Wagner, completely reimagined Norse mythology. Wagner's 1870 opera Die Walküre invented Valkyries as elite female soldiers with cavalry charges, nothing the Norse texts mentioned. His opera was so visually powerful and dramatic that it dominated Western imagination far more than the fragmentary old texts. Modern movies and games have compounded that. Shows like Vikings and games like God of War present Valkyries as independent warriors making their own choices about battle, when texts say they served Odin's orders, executing predetermined fate. The modern image appeals because it resonates with contemporary values around gender equality and independence. But that's not history. That's us projecting modern ideals backward onto the past.
But here's the uncomfortable truth. We know surprisingly little about how ordinary Norse people actually understood Valkyries. The surviving sources? All elite literary texts, created by poets, chieftains, and later monks. Most of what we assume is built on fragments and educated guesses. The mythology is real, but the picture is incomplete. In fact, scholars still fundamentally debate what Valkyries actually were. Purely metaphorical representations of fate? Literal supernatural beings? Elaborations of real women warriors whose actual stories vanished? The fragmentary sources can't resolve any of it. The mythology is genuinely unknowable. When you watch Valkyries in modern shows, you're not seeing Norse mythology. You're seeing a 19th century romantic fantasy built on medieval Christian retellings of oral traditions already fragmentary and broken. The real Valkyries, if we can ever know them, were something far stranger. Not warriors choosing fate, but fate itself choosing warriors.